I was working as a night security guard at a small factory in rural Ohio. It was a lonely shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., mostly spent walking through empty corridors, checking doors, monitoring cameras, and trying to fight off sleep. That night, as usual, I arrived 15 minutes early, grabbed the radio, signed the logbook, and started my routine. The first round seemed perfectly normal. The security lights cast faint shadows along the hallways, and the silence from the idle machines created an eerie, muffled stillness. The only odd thing was the cold. The ventilation system seemed faulty, making the air unusually chilly for that time of year. At the time, I didn't think much of it. As I walked through the main production floor, I noticed how the echoes of my own footsteps bounced off the metal walls. Every creak of the structure seemed amplified. The distant drip of water from a leaking pipe added an irregular rhythm to the silence, like a faint heartbeat deep inside the factory. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, creating quick flashes of darkness that seemed to play tricks on my vision. Around midnight, while reviewing the shipping sector on the monitors, I noticed something strange, a quick movement at the far end of Corridor 3. I paused, zoomed in, but saw nothing. Just stacked boxes and shadows cast by the emergency lights. A slight discomfort settled in, but I convinced myself it was just fatigue. I kept watching the monitors for a few minutes, searching for any logical explanation. Maybe a shadow, a reflection from the emergency lights, or a glitch in the camera itself. Still, I decided to patrol Corridor 3 in person, just to be sure. The hallway smelled faintly of oil and metal. As I walked, the sound of my own breathing grew louder inside my head. My flashlight cut through the semi-darkness, revealing dust particles floating in the cold air. Every few steps I stopped to listen, convinced I was hearing faint shuffling far ahead, though nothing appeared in my beam. The moment I arrived, the air felt even colder. The security lights cast long shadows across the piles of boxes, and the silence felt heavy, pressing down on me. As I walked slowly through the corridor, I heard a faint whisper from somewhere ahead. It was soft, barely audible, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I froze for a moment, trying to locate the source, but the whisper stopped as suddenly as it started. I looked around. No one. Just boxes, shadows, and that unsettling cold. A knot formed in my stomach. Something was different tonight. I quickly returned to the surveillance room, but the discomfort lingered. As I watched the monitors again, Camera 7, aimed at Corridor 3, began showing minor static interference. Wavy lines flickered, briefly forming what looked like a distorted silhouette at the far end. I took a deep breath, trying not to panic. I rebooted the monitoring system, hoping it was a technical glitch. When the feed returned, it was clear, except for one detail. One stack of boxes had fallen over, as if someone or something had passed through. The boxes hadn't just tipped randomly, but they looked pushed. Several of them lay at odd angles, and a heavy metal toolbox had slid several feet across the concrete floor. The motion felt deliberate, like something had passed through with force, but no visible presence remained. My pulse quickened, and I felt the hairs on my neck rise. Suddenly, the radio on my belt let out a sharp burst of static, followed by a loud crackling noise. No message, just unsettling sounds breaking the silence. That's when I realized something was definitely wrong. Grabbing my flashlight, I left the surveillance room and made my way back to Corridor 3. Each step echoed loudly in the metal hallways, amplifying my growing unease. As I turned the corner, the toppled boxes lay exactly as shown on the monitor. But then I noticed something new. Faint scratch marks on the floor, as if something had been dragged. The marks extended several feet, then abruptly disappeared. I followed them cautiously, Suddenly, a clear whisper sounded directly behind me. I spun around with my flashlight. Nothing. Just empty space, my beam cutting through the void. My instincts were screaming for me to leave. A cold draft suddenly swept through the hallway, though no vents were nearby. The light above me flickered, and for a fraction of a second I thought I saw a shadow dart along the wall, too fast to identify. My hands tightened around the flashlight as my breathing became shallow. I rushed back to the surveillance room. As I closed the door behind me, the main monitor flickered, freezing on an image that made my chest tighten. At the far end of Corridor 3, a dark figure stood still, facing the camera. Its form was vague, almost like a dense shadow, yet disturbingly human-like. I grabbed the landline to call my supervisor, but the line was dead. No dial tone, nothing. Only the faint static from my radio and the presence of that silhouette, still frozen on the monitor. Then the emergency lights threw out. The factory began flashing rhythmically. With each blink, the figure appeared slightly closer to the camera, as if moving only during the darkness. That's when real fear took hold of me. Without hesitation, I unlocked the surveillance room door and ran down the corridors toward the main exit. With every flash of the emergency lights, I felt the invisible presence growing closer behind me. The air grew colder, my breath forming visible clouds like being outside in winter. At the entrance, the automatic doors wouldn't respond. I frantically tried the control panel, but the system was frozen. A quick glance behind me revealed the dark figure standing at the far end, unmoving, framed by the flickering light. Desperate, I forced open the side emergency door. The lock gave way with a metallic snap, and I burst outside into the cold night air. For a moment, I thought I was finally safe. Standing outside, I moved as far away from the building as I could, my eyes locked on the dark windows. The emergency lights inside kept flashing intermittently. For a brief moment, I saw the shadowy figure behind the glass standing motionless, watching. Then the lights inside went out completely, plunging the factory into total darkness. No more movement. Only the steady sound of rain filled the night air. My hands shook, not just from the cold, but from what I had witnessed. The next morning, when the staff arrived, everything was in perfect order. No fallen boxes, no system failures, no trace of anything unusual. But I know what I saw. I worked as a night security guard at a commercial building undergoing renovation downtown. The entire place was empty at night. Several floors lacked proper lighting, filled with scaffolding, plastic sheets, and scattered tools covering dusty corridors. That night, a heavy storm rolled in shortly after midnight. Thunder made the building vibrate softly, while wind howled through poorly sealed window frames. I made my rounds, flashlight in hand, listening to the sounds of the wind and the structure creaking. The building felt even more oppressive that night. The plastic sheets tied to the scaffolding flapped constantly with each gust of wind, producing sharp, steady sounds. In some areas, construction floodlights flickered from minor power surges, casting long, distorted shadows across raw concrete walls. When I reached the 8th floor, I heard a loud thud, like a heavy door slamming several floors above. Odd, since I was supposed to be completely alone. I tried to stay rational. Maybe the wind, maybe shifting air pressure. For now, I told myself it was nothing unusual. I continued upward to investigate. The stairwells were dimly lit, with emergency lights flickering every few seconds. On the 9th floor, one of the large fire doors stood wide open, slowly swaying as the draft pulled at it. As I approached to close it, I heard a soft scraping sound deeper inside the corridor. It resembled something being dragged across the concrete floor. Due to the poor lighting, I couldn't see much beyond a few meters. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, partially illuminating tarps and piles of construction material. Each movement of the plastic created ever-changing shapes in the shadows, like something was subtly shifting behind them. My heartbeat quickened, though I tried to stay rational. I swept the corridor with my light, and for a brief instant, saw a shadow dart quickly into one of the unfinished rooms. My pulse jumped, but I kept my composure. It still felt too early to panic. Breathing carefully, I stepped forward. The walls remained unfinished, and the plastic sheets swayed gently, projecting, shifting patterns under my flashlight. The silence grew heavy, as though the entire building was holding its breath. The door to the room where I thought I saw the shadow stood ajar. I slowly pushed it open, the hinges creaking sharply. Inside, no one. Only scattered tools, cables, and a large black tarp in the corner. But something stood out, a fresh wet footprint in the thin layer of dust, as if someone had just been standing there. I scanned the room carefully, searching for logical explanations. A worker returning late, but during this storm? That's when my sense of unease deepened. I started backing away, but before I could exit, a faint whisper came from behind me. My body froze. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. Only the black tarp gently swaying as if recently disturbed. The air grew colder and the feeling of being watched intensified. Every small creak of the structure echoed unnervingly. Suddenly, the fire door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a metallic bang, its echo filling the floor. My heart pounding, I quickly headed toward the stairs. My footsteps seemed matched by faint synchronized steps behind me. By now I could no longer deny something unseen was following. The concrete walls felt like they were closing in as I descended. The plastic sheets shifted with each draft as if something brushed against them, always just out of sight. The steady rhythm of the steps behind me stayed constant, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. I hurried down to the 7th floor when the emergency alarm suddenly blared. A piercing tone filled the air, accompanied by pulsing red lights. The system wasn't supposed to activate on its own, especially during renovation. While trying to reset the panel, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. The shadowy figure slipped silently from one room to another. Its shape appeared humanoid but unnaturally smooth, gliding across the space. My radio started hissing with heavy interference, broken fragments of distorted voices crackling and vanishing. That's when full panic set in. I raced down the stairwell, toward the ground floor. The exit doors wouldn't budge. Outside, the streetlights flickered with the storm, casting fleeting shadows across the glass panels. Glancing back, I saw the dark figure standing frozen at the top of the stairwell, watching. Darkness wrapped around it, but its outline was unmistakable, suspended like a cutout frozen in place. Desperate, I pulled the emergency release lever. After a few seconds, the side door clicked open with a metallic snap. I stumbled into the rain-soaked street. For a moment, I thought I was finally safe. Outside, I kept my distance from the building, eyes locked on the dark windows. The emergency lights inside continued flashing erratically. For a brief moment, I saw the shadowy figure behind the glass, perfectly still, watching. Then the lights went completely dark. No movement. Only the steady sound of rain filled the air. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from what I had witnessed. The next morning, the contractors reported no system, failures or abnormalities. To everyone else, it was just another stormy night. But I know what I saw. I worked as a night security guard in the underground parking garage of a hospital. After midnight, ambulance traffic slowed, and the sublevels grew silent, with only a few doctors' cars and the distant hum of the elevators. That night, something felt different. The ventilation system produced its usual low hum, but occasionally I thought I heard faint whispers blending into the noise, as if they echoed from deep corners of the garage. I tried to convince myself it was only fatigue. Around 2 a.m. while patrolling level 3, I heard a loud clatter, like something heavy falling near the service elevators. I paused, listening carefully. Silence returned, but an unsettling feeling of being watched began to grow. My full attention locked in. The echoes of my footsteps bounced unnaturally between the concrete columns. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, creating flashes of darkness. Each shadow seemed heavier than it should be, and the air, usually damp, felt unnaturally cold for the season. I moved toward the source of the sound, walking slowly down the narrow corridor. The air grew denser, carrying a faint metallic odor. I reached the maintenance room where the noise seemed to originate. The handle felt ice cold. As I pushed the door open, it creaked loudly. Inside, nothing unusual, just stacked boxes and cleaning equipment. But in the center of the floor, a dark, wet stain formed a nearly perfect circle, as if something had stood there dripping for a long time. Suddenly, my radio hissed violently, emitting a brief, distorted whisper, like someone trying to speak through heavy interference. That's when my unease turned into real fear. Slowly, I backed out of the room, trying to rationalize what I had seen. As I headed toward the ramp, I heard soft footsteps echoing behind me. But I was supposed to be alone. I spun around with my flashlight, but saw only parked cars and concrete pillars. The silence returned, but my heart was pounding. I picked up my pace, the sensation of being followed growing with every step. The ventilation hum cut off briefly, leaving behind a disturbing vacuum of sound. Darkness seemed to shift at the edges of my vision, as if shadows tried to avoid being seen whenever I turned my head. As I rounded a corner, one of the ceiling security cameras started panning slowly, as if tracking movement. It stopped, pointed, directly at me, which shouldn't happen since the cameras weren't programmed for motion detection at night. That's when I knew something else was moving down there. I decided to head to the surveillance room near the emergency exit. As I walked, the flickering fluorescent lights grew increasingly erratic, seemingly responding to my movements. The ventilation system stopped completely, plunging the garage into oppressive silence. Inside the surveillance room, I locked the door behind me and scanned the monitors. On one feed, deep within the far section of the garage, a dark, humanoid figure stood perfectly still between two parked cars. Its form was vague, dense like a shadow, but undeniably human-shaped. As I watched, the image began glitching, and the figure appeared to shift closer with each flicker, inching forward during each brief distortion. The danger felt very real. Tried adjusting the camera remotely, but the controls were unresponsive. The screen flickered between static and glimpses of the approaching shadow, now just feet from the lens. My radio emitted a deep, low-frequency hum, almost like a vibration filling the small room. The lights pulsed in sync with the sound. For a split second, I caught the reflection of the shadow behind me on the door's glass. I spun around, but nothing was there. The control panel began sparking lightly, as if something was interfering with the building's entire electrical system. That's when I knew I had to leave. I rushed to the side exit, but the electronic lock was frozen. The small screen blinked with strange error codes. As I struggled with the manual override, another metallic bang echoed from deep within the garage, followed by a brief flash of emergency lights. Each pulse of light revealed the dark figure closer, moving like liquid between the rows of cars, yet entirely silent. My hands trembled as I inserted the master key card to reboot the lock system. Finally, the emergency door released with a metallic click. I burst outside into the humid night air. For the first time that night, I could finally breathe. I moved, as far away as I could, never taking my eyes off the glass entrance. Inside, the emergency lights kept flickering erratically. For several seconds, I saw the shadowy silhouette behind the glass, standing perfectly still, watching. Then the lights inside went completely dark. No movement. Only the steady sound of rain filled the air. My hands continued to tremble, not from the cold but from what I had witnessed. The next morning, everything appeared perfectly normal. No system malfunctions, no strange footage. To everyone else, it was just another quiet shift. But what I witnessed that night still haunts me.